So today I'm going to be taking a look at the Monta Atlas. This is the first time I've ever had experience with a Monta watch. Obviously the watch community really just fawns over them, so we'll see what it's all about.
We have a diameter of 38.5 millimeters, lug to lug of 47.2, height of 10.4, and a lug width of 20 millimeters. Some other general specifications for this watch: we're going to have sapphire crystal on the front and back. We're going to have 7 layers of anti-reflective AR on the underside of the front crystal. It has 150 meters of water resistance, as stated on the dial there. Got some nice BGW9 Lume applied to all of the markers and indices. You got the movement, which they call the Monta M23 movement, which is just basically a Sellita SW330 beating at 28,800 vibrations per hour. Got that GMT functionality, and we have about a 42-hour power reserve. So taking a look at this dial, this is the charcoal dial variant. And I really like this one because in a lot of lightings, as you can see right now, it looks very dark gray / black. And then you'll get like a nice brown, lighter gray that plays out at different times. Hopefully we can get that in at the lower zoom level, or higher zoom level really. And if it doesn't come out, I'll add some other videos in more direct sunlight. But looking at the dial directly, we kind of just see it is pretty well done. We have a fairly simple minutes track on the outside, applied indices at every 5-minute marker. We got a longer indice at 3, 6, and a kind of trapezoidal triangular type indice at 12 o'clock. We have a sword style set of hands, which Monta uses on almost all their watches. They just don't use it on the newest, I believe it's called the Noble, which is more of a dressier type leaning watch. What I really like about this watch in particular is how well they've integrated the secondary color. You have these really nice subtle hints of red in the Atlas lettering, in the GMT hand tip, and all along those 5-minute markers on the outside in this rehaut here. So it's all really nicely done. I like that they kept the GMT functionality to the rehaut itself so that it's not cluttering the actual dial. It's actually letting it look, one, a little bit bigger because there's not much clutter, making it feel shrunken down. So at 38.5 millimeters, I'm sure some people want it to at least visually look a little bigger than its dimensions. And also, I just prefer that it kept the design cleaner. It looks a little bit better. It looks a little bit dressier, although I wouldn't say this is necessarily a dressy watch. Looking at the dial up close, we can definitely see the lighter grayish dial coming out to play. You can see it's a very fine sunburst texture to the dial. I really do like companies that go for a less aggressive sunburst texture, because I feel like in that case you definitely do get more of 2 colors instead of 1 color just popping out all the time, even when it might look unpleasant in a way. You can see there are some blemishes on the hour hand there, but you can't really expect perfection. It doesn't look too bad. It's not something that's noticeable from the wrist at all. The hands do look good though. Looking at the GMT hand, there is a slight little blemish where the steel meets the paint. But overall, I think the way the GMT hand looks, the kind of glossy nature of the red, it just complements the watch really well. The markers are done very cleanly. As you can see, there may be slight blemishes on them, slight little dust marks, but nothing too major. The actual lume is applied really nicely. It doesn't have any noticeable graininess to it. It's not a very big kind of texture to the lume. There are no spots or dents or really blemishes among any of the lume plots. So really good application there. Overall, I just kind of like how bubbly the Atlas logo looks. All the text is really done really cleanly, but this Atlas logo in particular, it has kind of a dimensionality to it, a little depth to it. And a fun little quirky aspect is the fact that that GMT hand there is actually curved. Something that was unnecessary, but definitely cool that it's there.
Moving on to the case of this watch, they definitely didn't reinvent the wheel here or anything. They kept it pretty simple. Mostly brushed watch here with a vertical brushing on the lug tops, an outward radial, well, not really radial, but an outward brushing on the bezel there, and overall just standard horizontal brushing on the case sides. One thing I will note is the brushing is done pretty nicely. It's a pretty fine grain to it. It doesn't look harsh or dramatic or, I guess, brutal in its application. So I think it does add to the classiness of the watch, just being a pretty good application. Signed little Monta crown. You got some nice polished reliefs on the lug side here, as well as the lug innard. I don't know if I'm a huge fan of just the lug innard being kind of polished, but I guess it kind of does thin the lug out a little bit. So I could take it or leave it, but I guess it's nice that it is there. Slight dome, or at least a slight box to that sapphire crystal there. Really nice. Overall, I wouldn't say this is the most ergonomic case. It's fairly flat on the mid case here, slight curve down at the very ends. The case back does protrude a little bit, so in theory, the case back will kind of sit into the wrist and the watch will just sit on top. I think they could have engineered it a little bit to have a kind of almost softer side there. So it doesn't dig into the wrist as much, but it is a decently wearing case as it is. Kind of standard 3-link bracelet here, going to a nice signed Monta clasp. Kind of have this nice little groove cut out into the actual bracelet here, so you can actually purchase the flip down part really easily. Really nice mechanism, really smooth action, and then when you pull it out, it pulls out really easily. One thing I will notice is that because this is kind of like a friction fit mechanism, you do need kind of a lot of force to actually get that in there. Sometimes if I try to close it on my actual wrist, it kind of hurts a little bit, but hey, you know, give and take for having a really well constructed bracelet. One other cool thing about it being, you know, a properly nice bracelet with a milled clasp and whatnot is it actually does have micro adjust, and to use it, you just pull down on this link and then you just slide it along. You got the 1, 2, 3 positions and the starting, so technically 4 positions of micro adjust, which is really nice to see. Toolless micro adjustment is just awesome. Nice to see at this price point. Nice to see, you know, when brands like Tudor can't do it on their more affordable models. So kudos to Monta. Moving on to how this watch wears. Earlier, I was wearing my Visitor Linden, and here we have the Monta on my 6.5-inch wrist. And as I think you can see proportionally, it looks really nice. It doesn't overhang by any means because it has a very short lug to lug. The 38.5mm diameter sits really well on my smaller wrist. And it is just overall a decently comfortable watch. I would say one thing to notice is I think the crown may be slightly too big. I just tend to wear my watches kind of right in this section between the wrist and where the hand meet. So sometimes if I'm flexing a little too much, the crown really likes to dig in there. But if you wear it, you know, over here, you're really not gonna notice that at all because obviously the crown isn't that huge. But it is one thing to notice because I feel like a lot of people do wear it like this as well. As you can see there, the watch wears pretty flatly on the wrist. There isn't a lot of curvature to it again, but it is a very thin case. It's not too bulky by any means, so you don't necessarily need a bunch of curvature for it to fit on the wrist nicely. Overall, you're able to get a good fit with half links and a micro adjust. So first strap we'll try this on is a little bit more of a dressier strap. This is a Italian leather from Vario. I believe they call this their maroon color. And I just think it's nice because it complements kind of the red tone of the, just kind of like red little elements on the watch here. I don't think the watch works perfectly on leather, and I think that's just because the overall package is a little bit more sporty leaning. And I think on the wrist, you'll be able to tell more. And as you're seeing on the wrist, I think that the case is just kind of prominent, very almost blocky, and just almost really H-like, really just planted on the wrist. And I think it just kind of doesn't lend itself to the elegance needed for a leather strap. No problem there. I mean, some people won't mind how it looks. Again, I think most of the watch community leans more towards sports watches anyway. But for me, as someone who kind of stays in that dress watch territory, it is not perfectly suited to dress watch environments. And this is a combo I think looks a lot better. Of course, we have the Elite Silicone from Barton, a lot more sporty feeling, and again, a lot more in with the theme of the watch, I feel. And there you have it on the wrist. I think the colors go together really well. I think the nice little texture adds a little bit of something to the watch itself. Obviously, being a silicone strap, it's very comfortable, and just a nice kind of summer option for when you don't want to wear the bracelet. As we can see, you know, the Monta has that nice BGW9 lume on it. It all shines pretty brightly. All the color temperatures match pretty well. We even have some lume on the seconds hand there, so you can really tell the time in the dark, and hey, you can even tell the GMT time in the dark. Reluming and comparing to the Timex, as I always do, you can see the color temperatures are pretty similar, the brightness about them are pretty similar, so Monta really did do a good job with the lume here. It lasts for a pretty decent amount of time, and it's what I would expect from a watch at this price point. So pros and cons of this watch, of course, the first pro I'm gonna basically say immediately is the sizing. At 38.5mm, it's a great size to have. I love to see more watches under 40mm, and it's not too badly made, especially with the short lug to lug. Other than that, I really like the way the bracelet is constructed and made. It's really nice to have micro adjust, especially at this price point. The micro adjust system works really well. It is just convenient to have a toolless micro adjust system. And other than that, I really like the dial. I think the blue, the silver, and this dial, they all just did really good on the color temperatures of the watches. They did really good on the execution of the accent colors. And overall, for just this particular dial way, or colorway, I think the fact that it's that really like between gray and black, and it has those really hints of vibrant red within it, I think it just stands out, something unique that not a lot of companies do or go for, and it's just really good looking. So moving on to cons, one of the bigger cons for me is weirdly just a very small detail, and that being the 12 o'clock marker. I don't really prefer the trapezoidal shape on watches. I really would have preferred maybe like a double baton there or something. I just don't really like how it looks, plays with the watch. I think it is a little bit too aggressively styled for the rest of the watch, where the rest of the dial is kind of trying to be as clean as possible. So I think they could have refined that a little bit more. Other than that, I don't really love the Lume signature or the Lume color. It really does lean yellow, and I showed you my visitor Lyndon, that's very, very starkly white Lume, and the Monta just isn't that. But I feel like that's definitely something they could look into. I mean, it would have been nicer to have a stark white Lume popping out from that really nice grayish black dial. And other than that, my biggest kind of con with the watch is, for me, it wasn't an overly comfortable watch to wear. Again, the crown really dug into my wrist. Depending on how I had the bracelet size, sometimes the bracelet dug into my wrist. So I think there is just kind of some beveling, or I don't even know if it would call beveling, but just some rounding to edges they could do to just kind of, whenever there is a movement on the wrist, it just becomes more comfortable. It doesn't dig as much. It's kind of just, it becomes a little bit softer instead of harsher in its angles at some areas. So that can be some slight improvement. Other than that, there's not too many cons with the watch. So final thoughts on this watch, and it basically comes down to, would I buy this watch? And the answer is no. At $2,000 new, you're looking at a price range where you can get a lot of value below that and a lot of value slightly above that. So it's kind of almost like, why would I go with this one? So unless you really, really just love the styling of the Atlas, I don't think it's for you. If you want a GMT, you can go a little cheaper and go with the Christopher Ward. It's by no means a lesser product, and I actually prefer the styling of the Christopher Ward a little more. If you want to save a lot of money, you can go with something like a Notice. Maybe you already have a bunch of toolish leaning watches in your collection, and when you want to step up to something more dressy, you can go for something like a Nomos or one of those Longines reeditions. There's just, or even if you're okay with more sporty watches, going for something like an Oris Aquis or the Diver 65. There's just so many watches at this price point. Oh, even the Oris Pointer Day. There's just, again, there's just so many watches at this price point that I don't think this is necessarily the best watch out there for the price. So unless this is one of those watches where you just lust over it, you basically see it, and every time you just want it, you hope to own it one day, it's the most beautiful watch you've ever seen, or at least some version of that story, it might not be the watch for you, but that's just my take on it. I hope you got something out of the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another one.